Ever noticed how you can remember song lyrics like effortlessly, but then try to remember a page from your favorite book and it's like pulling teeth? It's crazy, right?
It really is.
Yeah. It's the power of melody. I think music just makes things stick. And that's a pretty good example of how powerful vocal and visual communication can be, don't you think?
Absolutely. I think we underestimate it all the time.
Yeah. Think of this deep dive as your cheat sheet for leveling up your communication skills.
Definitely. Whether you're leading a team,
Yeah.
giving a presentation, or just trying to, make a lasting impression.
Make a lasting impression.
Yeah.
Exactly. So Jang starts off strong. He tells this story about the magician Valentino. You might know him as the masked magician.
Oh, yeah. The guy who revealed all the magic tricks on TV.
Yeah, back in the 90s. And at the time, people thought he was like single-handedly ruining the magic industry.
Right. Magicians were furious.
Furious. But Yang makes this really interesting point. He says that Valentino actually forced magic to evolve.
I never thought about it like that.
It's a cool perspective, right?
Yeah. He forced magicians to up their game.
Exactly. They had to collaborate with psychologists and artists, like they were pushed to come up with these new and incredible illusions.
So it was like innovation by force.
Totally. And that's where Jang brings it back to us. He argues that challenges, like let's say the pandemic, can push us to become better communicators too.
Makes sense.
But what I love is that he doesn't just say, like, be better. He actually breaks down how to do it.
Which is what we all need, right? The how-tos.
Exactly. So one of the things he talks about is this idea of technical skill versus showmanship. And this is a big one. He says you can be a 10 out of 10 expert in your field, but if your communication skills are a 2 out of 10, guess what?
People are going to see you as a 2.
Ouch. Right?
It's harsh, but it's true.
It's a hard truth. And it makes you think, right? Because I know I've been in those situations where I had what I thought was a brilliant idea, but I just couldn't get it across.
I think we've all been there.
That's so frustrating.
We're like, why aren't they getting this?
Exactly. So that's where Zhang's insights become so valuable. He's helping us unlock that other half of the equation, the communication piece.
And he breaks it down really well.
He does. He breaks communication down into 2 main parts, visual image and vocal image.
So visual image is like your clothing, body language.
Yeah.
First impression stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he says that creates initial assumptions, but then vocal image, that's how you actually speak.
Which is so important.
Right. It cements those assumptions into beliefs.
That's a good way to put it. Beliefs. The moment you open your mouth.
The moment you open your mouth, people are judging, not just on what you're saying, but how you're saying it. It's scary.
It is. It makes you really tune in to like the nuances of your voice.
The nuances. Exactly.
Yeah.
And he breaks down those nuances into 5 key elements.
Okay.
Go
5
on.
elements.
Yeah.
Rate of speech, volume, pitch, and melody tonality.
Okay.
And the pause.
The pause. Interesting.
And I have to say I'm a bit obsessed with the pitch and melody part.
Oh, yeah. Tell me more.
Well, he uses a piano to demonstrate how different melodies can evoke different emotions, even without any words.
It's a really cool way to illustrate that point, because we all know music can make us feel things.
Right. And he's basically arguing that most people only use like a tiny fraction of their vocal range.
Yeah.
So their speech ends up being kind of monotonous.
Like a pianist only playing a couple of notes.
Exactly. And I have to admit, when he said that, I was like, wait, am I only using a few notes?
Yeah.
It really made me think, do you think most people are even aware of how musical their voice can be?
Probably not. I mean,
Yeah.
most of us are so focused on the content of what we're saying that we forget about the delivery part.
That's true. So how do we like unlock those extra notes?
Well, that's what Jiang dives into. He goes through each of those 5 elements in detail.
Starting with the rate of speech.
And he makes this point that any default speed, whether it's slow or fast, it just gets boring.
Yeah. It's like listening to a song with no tempo changes.
It's got to have variety, right? You need to like slow down for emphasis or speed up when you're, moving through less crucial information.
So it's like a verbal highlighter when you slow down.
Exactly. Like this is the important part. Pay attention.
I love that analogy.
And then there's volume. Now, he's not saying to go around shouting at people,
Right.
but it's about projecting confidence and energy.
Okay.
So he suggests aiming for a volume of like 5 or 6 out of 10.
That makes sense.
It shows you believe in what you're saying.
It's like a subtle cue.
And that leads into pitch and melody. This is where he gets really interesting.
How so?
Well, he argues that varying your pitch makes your message more memorable and engaging.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
It's like adding depth to a musical composition.
Exactly. And then there's tonality. This is where he gets really animated.
Oh, yeah, I've seen this part.
Yeah,
He does all those funny facial expressions.
he does. He literally demonstrates how using different facial expressions can control those 6 core emotions, like happy, sad, angry, disgust, surprise, and fear.
It's amazing how just changing your face can change the way good morning sounds.
It's crazy, right?
Yeah. Like a whole different message.
It makes you think about how often we're sending the wrong message with our face, like without even realizing it.
Oh, for sure. I've definitely been guilty of that.
It's a little terrifying.
Yeah. But at least now we're aware of it.
That's true. And then there's the power of the pause. This is a big one. And I think a lot of people struggle with it.
Myself included.
We're so afraid of silence. But he makes a really strong case for embracing it.
So what does he say?
He says that pauses give people time to process information.
Which is so important, especially if you're giving a presentation or
Yeah,
something.
and they help eliminate those filler words like and
Oh,
likes.
okay.
Yeah.
The ums and likes.
They can really undermine your message.
Totally.
And you know what else? Pauses can actually encourage other people to speak. Yeah, it's like an invitation to join the conversation.
I never thought about it that way.
So it's like cleaning up the static in a song,
Yeah.
making the message come through more clearly.
That's a great way to put it.
So we've covered the vocal foundations, but what about the visual side?
Okay. Yeah.
Well, he dives into hand gestures.
Hand gestures. And get this. There's a whole system for it.
No way.
Yeah, it's called the Surreer categories. And it was developed by a family therapist who was like studying the honesty of body language.
So there's a right way and a wrong way to use your hands?
Basically.
Right.
And there are these key gestures that he breaks down.
Like what?
Well, there's the plater, which is like palms up, open and inviting.
Okay.
Then there's the leveler, palms down, more authoritative.
Uh.
And then there's the blamer. You got to use that one careful.
Playing fingers?
Exactly. Not always the best look.
I can imagine.
There's also the computer pose, which is like, the thinker pose. Shows active listening.
Like that one. And then there's the distractor, which is like a clap and reset. Useful for regaining attention if you've lost it.
So there's a gesture for every situation.
Pretty much. And it's funny because when you mentioned the blamer, it reminded me of this time I was giving a presentation to my boss, and I accidentally pointed at him.
Oh, no.
I wanted to disappear. Like, I was mortified. It definitely taught me to be more mindful of my hand gestures.
I bet.
Even in virtual settings, like on Zoom,
That's interesting because I feel like we're so focused on what we're saying on Zoom
Yeah.
that we forget about our body language.
Totally. But those hand gestures add another dimension. They can emphasize your points, convey confidence, and even help you regain someone's attention if you've lost it.
It's worth thinking about.
It is. So to put all this into practice, Zhang offers this really cool self-awareness exercise.
Okay. What is it?
He calls it record and review. And basically, you record a 5-minute video of yourself speaking, and then you review it 3 times. First, you listen to the audio only. Then you watch the video with no sound. And then you read a transcript with all those filler words highlighted.
So you're seeing yourself from 3 different angles.
Exactly. And it forces you to analyze your communication. Like, really analyze it. You become aware of all those little habits and tics that might be undermining your message.
I can see how that would be helpful.
Right. And you start to see how your body language is either reinforcing or contradicting what you're saying.
It's like holding up a mirror to your communication style.
That's a great way to put it. And it might feel a little awkward at first, but the self-awareness you gain is so valuable.
Definitely. And the more you do it, the more comfortable you become.
And Zhang ends this section with this really interesting point.
Yep.
He talks about how different cultures might emphasize different aspects of communication. Like, he mentions how some of his Singaporean clients who were speaking English needed to work on their articulation because their mouths were moving in ways shaped by their native language.
That's fascinating.
It was impacting the clarity of their speech, even though their core message was really strong.
So what did he do?
He had them exaggerate their mouth movements while reading aloud.
Really?
And it made a huge difference.
It's amazing how those tiny adjustments can make such a big impact.
I know. It's like a little tweak can completely change how you come across.
And it makes you wonder how your own cultural background might be influencing your communication style without you even realizing it.
That's a great point. Because we all come from different places.
Yeah.
And those influences shape how we express ourselves.
A whole other layer to think about.
And that's what I love about Zhang's approach. He's not just breaking down the mechanics of communication.
Right.
He's also encouraging us to think critically about all the different factors that influence how we communicate.
It's like he's giving us the tools, but we have to build the house ourselves.
Exactly. And that's what makes this deep dive so valuable. It's not just about learning a set of skills. It's about developing a deeper awareness of ourselves as communicators.
That's powerful.
It is. It's about understanding the why behind the how. And that's where the real magic happens.
I love that. The magic of communication.
The magic of connection.
It's powerful stuff.
It is. And it's interesting because he also talks about how we get stuck in a limited vocal range because we're afraid to sound fake, you
Right.
know?
Yeah, totally. Like, we don't want to sound like we're putting on a voice.
Exactly. But Jang reframes this in such a cool way. He compares our voices to a piano with 88 keys.
Okay, I like where this is going.
And he says most of us are only using like 12 of those keys.
Really? Only 20?
We stick to this narrow range that feels safe and familiar.
So we're playing a pretty limited tune.
Exactly. And if you think about a pianist only using a handful of keys, the music wouldn't be very dynamic, would it?
Not at all. It would be pretty boring.
So when we push ourselves to explore our full vocal range, we're not being inauthentic. We're actually unlocking our true potential as communicators.
It's like we're finally letting our voices sing.
I love that. And context is key, right? Like he emphasizes that even with our visual image, we need to adapt based on the situation.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Like you wouldn't wear a suit to the beach.
Exactly. He uses the example of a virtual meeting. Like if it's a casual check-in with colleagues, well, a t-shirt and shorts might be fine.
Right. But if it's a high-stakes presentation or a client meeting, then dressing up would make more sense.
Totally. It's about reading the room, even if it's a virtual room.
It's still a room.
It is. And you mentioned earlier how the pandemic forced this innovation in communication.
Yeah, like we had to figure out new ways to connect.
But haven't we also seen a decline in certain communication skills, like people being less patient or attentive during those virtual meetings?
I think that's a really good point. It's like we've had to adapt so quickly to all this new technology that maybe some of those core communication skills have taken a hit.
It's like we've become too reliant on emojis and quick responses, and we've forgotten how to actually engage with someone in a meaningful way.
I've definitely noticed that in some of my own interactions. It's like we're losing the art of conversation.
It's a good reminder that even though technology can facilitate communication, it doesn't automatically make us better communicators.
We still have to put in the effort.
Exactly. And that's what makes Zhang's focus on vocal and visual image so relevant. It brings us back to those fundamentals of human connection.
Regardless of the medium.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about vocal foundations, hand gestures, cultural influences, even the impact of technology. What stands out to you as the most valuable takeaway from all of this?
For me, it's the emphasis on self-awareness. Like Zhang provides us with this framework for understanding how we communicate. But it's up to us to take that framework and apply it to our own unique style.
It's like he's giving us the tools, but we have to build the house.
Exactly. And that's where that record and review exercise becomes so crucial.
Right. It's that willingness to look at ourselves objectively and identify areas where we can improve.
And we all have those areas.
We do. And I think a lot of people hesitate to actually work on their communication skills because they're afraid of sounding fake,
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to distinguish between fake and intentional. Like when we're consciously working on these skills, we're not trying to be someone we're not.
Right.
We're just refining our ability to express ourselves more clearly and effectively.
It's like learning to play a musical instrument. You don't just sit down at a piano and expect to sound like Mozart.
Exactly. You have to practice,
Yeah.
make mistakes, and gradually develop your technique.
And communication is the same way.
It's a skill that can be learned and improved.
And the more we practice, the more natural and authentic our delivery will become.
It's about finding that balance between intentionality and genuineness.
So we've been talking about the how of communication, but what about the why? Like, why do we choose certain words or tones or gestures?
It's a good question. I think a lot of our communication is unconscious, driven by habits and patterns we've developed over time.
So it's like we're on autopilot.
In a way.
Yeah.
But by becoming more aware of those patterns, we can start to make more conscious choices about how we communicate.
It's like shining a light on those hidden dimensions of communication.
Exactly. And recognizing that there's often more at play than we realize.
And maybe that's something for our listeners to consider, like how much of their communication is intentional and how much is influenced by those unconscious habits or cultural norms.
I think that's a really powerful question to reflect on.
It adds a whole other layer of complexity and intrigue to the process.
It does. It makes you realize that communication is this multifaceted thing,
It's not just about words. It's about everything else that goes along with them.
The tone, the body language,
Yeah.
the context, the culture.
And the technology too, right? Like we can't ignore the impact of technology on how we communicate.
Oh, absolutely. Especially in today's world,
Yeah.
with virtual interactions becoming more and more prevalent.
So how do you think platforms like Zoom or social media are impacting our vocal and visual choices?
Well, I think we're still figuring that out. We're adapting to these new mediums,
Hmm.
and our communication styles are evolving as a result.
Have you noticed how people tend to speak more concisely on video calls and use more animated facial expressions?
Oh, yeah, totally. It's like we're trying to compensate for the lack of physical presence by amplifying those vocal and visual cues.
It's fascinating, and it makes me wonder, like, as technology continues to evolve, will we develop entirely new communication norms for these virtual environments?
That's a really interesting question to think about because it highlights the dynamic nature of communication. Like the fundamentals remain constant,
Right.
but the way we express ourselves is constantly being shaped by the tools and technologies we use.
It's a good reminder that communication is a constantly evolving field, and those who embrace that evolution will be the most successful in connecting with others.
I think that's a great point to end on.
And it makes you think about all the different ways we adapt our communication, like depending on who we're talking to.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like even within our own culture, we shift how we speak depending on the audience.
It's true. It's like thinking about how you'd explain something complex to a 5-year-old versus how you'd explain it to a colleague.
Right. It's totally different.
You wouldn't use the same language or tone.
No way. And it's not even about dumbing things down. It's more about like tuning into their level of understanding,
Exactly. Using language that resonates with them.
And it's not just about words either, right?
No, it's everything.
Yeah.
Our tone, our pace, our body language. Like think about how you talk to a close friend versus how you talk to a stranger.
Totally different vibe.
It's a different level of familiarity that shapes how we communicate.
So it's like we're constantly recalibrating, taking into account the context, the culture, the technology, even the individual.
It's a lot to juggle.
It is. But that's what makes human communication so fascinating.
Right? It really is. It's this constant dance of adaptation and adjustment.
So being a masterful communicator is really about being a master of adaptation.
I like that.
Being aware of all those subtle cues and responding in a way that creates connection.
And that requires us to be present in our interactions.
Yeah. Not just thinking about what we're going to say next.
But really tuning into the other person.
And maybe even adding a touch of playfulness. Communication shouldn't feel like a chore.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think bringing a sense of curiosity and fun to the process makes it more enjoyable for everyone.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into vocal and visual image, if there's one thing you hope our listener takes away from this, what would it be?
I'd say embrace the journey. Don't be afraid to experiment, to step outside your comfort zone, even to make mistakes along the way.
Because it's all part of the learning process, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like anything else worth mastering.
Hmm.
It takes practice, dedication, and a willingness to keep refining your skills.
And remember, it's all about connection.
At the end of the day, communication is about connecting with other human beings.
And when we focus on that human element, the techniques and strategies become tools to enhance those connections, not replace them.
Beautifully said.
Well, this has been such a fascinating conversation. I feel like I've learned so much.
Me too.
I'm definitely going to be trying out some of those techniques, especially that record and review exercise.
You should. It's a game changer.
I'm sure it is. And for you listening, we hope this deep dive has sparked some new ideas and inspired you to level up your own communication skills.
It's a journey, not a destination.
And every step you take towards becoming a more confident and impactful communicator is a step worth celebrating.
Couldn't agree more.
Thanks for joining us.